One of the most well-known regions within Southeast Asia, the Sabah region is known for its undeveloped charm, as well as the mountainous terrain of the region. In modern times, the region is increasingly a harbor of tourism for Malaysia, as well as the appeal of the region is attracting more people to settle and live within it. But the facts of the Sabah aren't what most would exactly or logically expect them to be. The forgotten history. Despite the facts that the Sabah region, or the island of Borneo that Sabah is a part of, there aren't a lot of detailed records about its history. Human habitation of the earliest sort date back to roughly 20,000 or 30,000 years ago. Detailed records of the region didn't formally exist until a tributary state of the Srivijaya Empire expanded into the region, around what's now considered to be the northeastern coast of Borneo. These accounts are from roughly the 7th century. As another kingdom mentioned within Chinese records from roughly the 9th century being that of the Paoni existed at the Brunei River and was theorized to be the predecessor to the modern Sultanate of Brunei. Bruneian records of the region commence from roughly the early 1400s, and from this time onwards the region is documented on having a presence within the greater Southeast Asian region, but due to the then remoteness from mainland Southeast Asia, there's not much development, exploration, or even acknowledgement of the region as being a part of the neighboring empires. The denied history. Once Bruneian influence began to spread through Sabah as well as the entire island of Borneo, at the time Islam was the main religion that was gradually replacing the animalistic, shamanistic, or primordial customs of the region. Due to the influences from the indigenous peoples, Arabic traders, intermarriage became commonplace, and as a result of the blendings of cultures and peoples, who exactly was a native of the region, as well as which empire or kingdom laid claim to Sabah, began to be disputed during this time. The censored history. In the mid-1600s, the Bruneian Sultanate gave the northern and eastern regions of Borneo to the Sultanate of Sulu, as payment for the Sulu coming to the Bruneian call for aid within the civil war that they had around the same time. Despite the official declaration that Brunei had given the regions to the Sulu, it remained sparingly within Bruneian control, while also under the same time governed by the new Sulu overlords. The region was then, for all intents and purposes, under the combined Bruneian and Sulu leadership. Populations from the southern Sulu migrated into Sabah, as well as due to the entire archipelago now being engulfed by Spanish colonialism. In the mid-1700s were the first examples of British interest within the region, as authorities from Britain made an agreement with the Sultanate of Sulu allowing them to set up a trading outpost within the region. Though the post was later considered a failure, these were the origins of the British claims to the region. From then onwards, nominal control over the region continued by both Brunei and the Sulu. However, in 1846, the island of Labutan on the western coast of Sabah was ceded by Brunei to Britain and later became a colony. As through the decades, Britain slowly expanded its influence through the Bruneian and Sulu-based Sabah. In 1865, American interests obtained a 10-year lease over northern Borneo from the Bruneian Sultanate, as the trade lease went from ownership to ownership through circumstances as the United States lost interest in the region for a time, due in part because of the American Civil War of the time as well, and naturally the United States rebuilding itself shortly after the conclusion of the war. Britain reinforced its holdings within the region as the weakening of the Bruneian and Sulu powers made it the dominant unofficial force within the region. In 1885, British, Spanish, and German authorities signed the Madrid Protocol, which was to formally recognize Spanish control of the region, but at the same time for Spain to relinquish all claims it might have had over northern Borneo due to it controlling the archipelago within the region now called the Philippines. In 1888, the region now officially called North Borneo was officially incorporated into the British Empire, as the region was distant from other settlements that that the British had within Southeast Asia, as the British eventually decided to extract the resources of the region and brought Chinese migrants into Sabah for work. These Chinese workers became the origins of the Chinese now within the region. Once the United States defeated Spain in the Spanish-American War of 1898, the entirety of the Philippines was within American governance. The American government lobbied Britain for its leases previously as well as the Sulu claim to the region, even though through the older claims, the United States technically should have obtained the Sabah region. Britain essentially ignored the United States' formal declarations for the region and further integrated it into its crown colonial possessions of Southeast Asia. The First and Second World Wars left the dispute of Sabah as well as who formerly officially owned it, as even the entire island of Borneo were unresolved. As once the Second World War was concluded, Britain later consolidated all of its colonies into the region known as modern Malaysia, as Brunei, the Philippines, and Indonesia, the modern nations that emerged through circumstances from the Second World War, all objected to the blatant ignoring of all their long claims and border disputes. Upon the Philippines' independence from the United States in 1946, one of the first diplomatic acts of the new country was to formally press Malaysia for the return of the Sabah region to Filipino governing. The United States didn't exactly consider the maneuver to be legitimate due to the Bruneian and Sulu claims of governorship of the region exactly absolute. The region had been under unclear rule for centuries, and in a modern and more confusingly Western-based court system, the claims wouldn't be considered valid. Even Spanish-based claims to the Sabah region wouldn't necessarily be credible within modern courts, due to the fact that the Spanish control of the southern Philippines was semi-autonomous at best, and at the very most, due to the Sultanate of Sulu not being fully conquered by Spain, the claim to Sabah by the Philippines through the Spanish claim were simply that of ancient points of view for a modern nation. In the early 1960s, the Philippine government made a formal declaration about the situation with the Sabah dispute, and even temporarily broke off international relations with Malaysia, while the Bruneian and Indonesian governments both kept a close eye on the international events playing out between the Philippines and Malaysia. Through the 1960s and well into the 1970s, the Filipino and Malaysian governments went back and forth through formal claims and counterclaims to the region. In 1987, the Filipino government officially repealed the declarations on claims originating from the 1960s, and the Malaysian government officially ignores all Filipino claims to the Sabah region. Since then, Malaysia has had a somewhat of a confrontational stance with its neighbors, as besides the Filipino or even Bruneian claims to the Sabah region, Malaysia has had a fractured relationship with Indonesia as well due to maritime fishing claims, and even the Chinese majority of Malaysia, when viewed as foreigners within Southeast Asia, being despised by the Filipinos, Bruneians, and Indonesians, have all led to Malaysia keeping an unusually close alliance with Britain, and even seeking diplomatic ties with Australia or New Zealand, and even to an extent the United States. The Malaysian government knows that if it were to ever lose part of Sabah, or even the entire region to Brunei or the Philippines, then a substantial portion of the modern Malaysian country would be automatically lost. The capital of Malaysia is geographically farther from the Sabah region than when compared to the capitals of Brunei or the Philippines. So there's a deep interest in keeping the Sabah region firmly out of Bruneian or even Filipino control, as the Sabah region is very rich with natural resources, appealing with foreign tourists, and even ripe for business development. To avoid the history of the region being lost, or even forgotten as to which nation should technically govern the Sabah, Bruneian and Filipino educational systems often include historical facts of Sabah. Whatever the fate of the Sabah region, it will be as it always has, involving multiple regional powers for whatever circumstances in terms of ownership or administration.